Hey guys, hello everyone. This is once again International Master Asaf Givon here, and today I'm going to continue in covering some of the games from the most recent World Championship chess match between Magnus, Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. And in this time, like in the other video, I'm going to analyze those games from a slightly different perspective than most of the videos and reports about these games. I'm going to be focusing mainly on their decision making in the most critical points in this game. How did they came to understand that these were critical moments which were very important to the evaluation of the position? How did they manage to do? Sometimes they did good, sometimes they did badly in these moments. How can we learn from this about our own chess game, and how should we kind of give extra attention to the most important critical moments of the chess game in terms of our attention and in terms of the time we spend on the clock? And for these purposes, in this video, actually including the clocks of the both players during the game. You can see them just above the board. So this is game number 8 of the match. I think it's probably the most critical match game of the match, because this game was Caruana's best chance to win a game against Carlsen. If he had won this match, who knows how this match would have gone. So let's go over it. So e4, c5. So really, I think this game already escalated pretty quickly to move number 3, because in all of the previous games which reached this position in the match, Caruana chose the move bishop b5, which was the Rossolimo Sicilian, the very solid line, which didn't really do too much to kind of try and outplay Carlsen in his opening. So this time he chose the more principled choice of the move d4, and this was really the first proper Sicilian game in this match. And Carlsen chose to defend himself with a Sveshnikov Sicilian. We're going to see a couple of more of these Sveshnikov Sicilians in the next games of the match. So Caruana played knight b5, d6, and here the main line is definitely bishop g5, but maybe after this match the fashion will be slightly shifted, because white played here the move knight d5, which is not an uncommon move. It's just not the most common. White is threatening knight c7, pretty much forcing the move knight takes d5, and after pawn takes d5, black played knight to b8, which is actually the main move. Later on in the match, Carlsen will be experimenting with the less common move knight to e7. For the time being, is playing knight to b8, and it was actually Caruana who was the first one to make, I think, a small surprise here with the move a4. You can see on the clock that he is playing this move fairly quickly. This is definitely not the most common move. Usually white is trying to activate his 4 versus 3 majority on the queen side with moves such as c4. a4 has slightly different plans in mind, but we will see later on that one of the points behind not playing the move pawn to c4 is that at some point this knight from b5 might be rerouted via a3 to the more stable square on c4. So black played bishop e7. You can see by the times on the clock that definitely, at least in the opening stage, Carlsen was the one to be perhaps slightly less confident about his move, at least in the first part of the game, because he was, I think, slightly surprised by Caruana's choice. Bishop e2, castles, everything is being played very quickly. Knight d7 is played, and now there are many moves that white can choose from. We will see in the next game that reach this position that Caruana will choose b4 in this position, but in this game He played bishop to d2, also fairly quickly, and now really a very strategic and actually pretty sharp battle is starting, where Black is trying to take advantage of his pawn majority on the king side. So he might play moves like f5 and e4 and try to roll up his pawns on that side of the board. White would try to do a similar thing on the queen side. So Black now played f5. Strangely enough, though, consuming 8 minutes of his time to make this move. I think that definitely should have made this type of move faster, because it's not an uncommon idea in these positions. And I don't think there are really any serious alternatives to this move. So White played a5, just continuing to push its pawns on the queen side. This pawn is actually useful for White. He has some options to push a6 at some point, and also his rook on a1. We will see later it can be developed now into the game, either from a3 to control this rank, or sometimes even through a4. Black played a6 to drive away White's knight, and now we see one of the ideas behind the move a4. White played knight to a3, and after the move e4, which actually we can see that Carlsen is also already using quite a bit of his time for his moves. Now White can play knight to c4, and the knight is nicely placed on that square, kind of looking at the square in b6, putting some small pressure on the pawn on d6. So this is definitely, I think Caruana is definitely happy about getting this position. He's not claiming a big advantage as White, but he definitely managed to make Carlsen slightly uncomfortable with his decisions. Carlsen now played an interesting choice, knight to e5. I think the reason why this move was played pretty quickly, even though I would consider it to be not an obvious move, because I think he already knew he's going to play this move, knight e5, when he played the move e4. So about the move e4, he thought for about 5 minutes, and then played knight e5 almost instantly, which makes sense since he kind of prepared this move in advance. It's an interesting choice because it allows White to take on e5, forcing Black to take back with the pawn. And this is actually, I think, a very interesting position. White is now having officially 4 versus 2 majority on the queen side of the board, but Black has a lot of pawns in the center and in the king side that can start moving at some point. So this could be a completely different game had Caruana played this move, but he chose, I believe, the more obvious move, knight to b6, hitting the rook in the corner, forcing the move rook to b8. You can see that Caruana is still playing very quickly. Perhaps he's still in his preparation, very good chance for it. Caruana is well known to be extremely well prepared in the opening stage. He now played the move f4, I believe a very good move, basically stopping, or at least aiming to stop Black's advance on the king side. Carlsen took on f3, bishop takes f3, and at this point I think Caruana really shows that he's very well prepared. This probably made Carlsen maybe slightly uncomfortable, and I think what happened at this point, Carlsen understood that if he will play the most obvious and normal moves in the position, it's very likely that Caruana would keep blitzing out the moves from his preparation. So I think at this point Carlsen began to think a bit, and he tried to come up with a bit of unexpected move, and that's why he played the move g5 here after about 12 minutes of thing. So this for him was a fairly critical point in the game, because he wanted to change the course of this game. He did not want to keep on playing on his opponent's territory, and I think in some place he knew that this move was probably objectively not the best, slightly compromising his king position, but for him it was not that important. He just wanted to make some unexpected move a little bit. This was also probably around the time where Caruana started consuming more time than before. The next move is playing fairly quickly, c4. It's a pretty obvious move, once again trying to activate white's majority on the queen side of the board. And black now plays the move f4 after another 10 minutes of thinking. As you remember in the previous video, we named a couple of types of critical moments in a chess game. We talked about a change of pawn structure to be a potentially critical moment in the game. This can explain why Carlsen is a little bit cautious with those f4 moves on the aggressive moves on the king side. He's taking a bit of time to think about them because he knows that he's compromising his king position. But his idea is to threaten eventually to push his pawns forward, and also he's enabling his light square bishop to get activated on f5. Caruana now plays the move bishop c3 after 10 minutes of thinking. Very natural move. This bishop is now potentially putting pressure on the knight on e5, which is a very active piece. And after the move bishop f5, which, as you can see, 20 minutes of thinking. Now this, my only explanation for this, in itself, the move bishop f5 is very natural, very obvious move. But behind this decision to play this move, there's a lot of calculations, because Carlsen, I think, knew that when he will play this move, Caruana will have at his disposal the move that he's just about to make. I think that another reason why he was thinking quite a lot at this point, that he had to evaluate whether he should exchange this knight for this bishop. So another type of critical moment in a chess game where you have piece exchanges, especially unbalanced exchanges, for example knight against the bishop. Also, he had to evaluate whether the move bishop takes knight on e5 would be in any danger for him. But finally he chose to play bishop f5. And now, maybe one of the most critical moments in this game. Caruana was thinking for, if I'm not mistaken, almost 30 minutes in this position. He understood that he has the upper hand, that he must act, that he must go forward, and eventually played the move c5. 33 minutes of thinking. So it's a huge percentage of his time on the clock. I think that if it was not a world championship match, and if his opponent was not Magnus Carlsen, he would take much less time to play this move. But this, once again, the stakes are very high. He doesn't want to lose any games. He wants to be sure he knows what he's doing. Also, in general, as we know, Caruana is just in general a more scientific player, which likes to calculate everything to the very end, be extremely sure that he knows what he's doing. Versus Carlsen, who is a more practical player, not always calculating till the end and trusting his intuition slightly more. So in this position, this is a pawn sacrifice, of course. Black now took on f3. I don't think he has too much choice but to accept the pawn sacrifice, because if he's not accepting this sacrifice, this pawn can potentially even advance forward and be a very dangerous passed pawn. So black takes on f3, queen takes on f3, pawn takes c5. So why is white sacrificing the pawn? First of all, this pawn on d5 is now a very serious asset that white has. This is a passed pawn. Also, white managed to get rid of black's very strong outpost on e5, which is maybe like the main merit of this sacrifice. This bishop is now a monstrous piece. And also, he got some development going. He managed to develop his queen very quickly. Now his rook on a1 also joins the game. So he played the move rook to d1. Some people claimed that it was more natural to go rook to e1 in the e-file, but I don't think we can really blame him for this. This is a very tough decision for a chess player to choose between two seemingly good squares for the rook. Caruana's intuition said rook d1. I think we should not blame him for this. Carlsen played the move bishop d6 in order to blockade that pawn on d5, because if he's not playing this move, then he needs to you need to take into consideration that white is very likely to push this pawn forward very soon. And this is now came really the most critical part of this game, arguably maybe one of the most critical moments in this match. This was really the moment where Caruana could take his position, which is already very good, and translate it into a very strong attack. And he had a couple of ways to do so. Basically two very good moves in this position. One of them is queen h5, just activating the queen, threatening to go queen to h6. Also putting some pressure against the pawn on g5. It's extremely difficult for black to parry these threats. Actually, these threats are so strong that perhaps the best thing black can do is queen e8, just sacrificing this pawn on g5 in order to activate his queen in the defense. And in this position, amongst others, white can even just trade off queens, play knight c4, force black to defend that bishop on d6, and then just go for the endgame, collecting the pawn on f4, where he has, I think, very good winning chances. Not only he has a pawn up, but also still the black king is fairly weak, so white still has some attacking ideas connected with the rook coming from behind. So this is one option. Another very promising move was knight c4. This is another point behind the sacrifice on c5, by the way, to be able to clear up that square on c4 for the knight. But for some reason, Caruana, I must say, also fairly quickly decided to play the move pawn to h3. Only after 6 or 7 minutes of thought, he played this move, which was really very surprising for a lot of people because it's a very slow move. It's a useful move, of course. It's creating a square for the king on h2. It's also stopping black's expansion on the king side with the move g4. But in such a dynamic position where every move is counting, it counts for quite a lot, to play such a slow move is really not the best thing that you can do. And this gave Carlsen just enough time to activate his queen with the move queen to e8, and after knight to c4, queen to g6. And now with the black queen safely defending the king, it's becoming much more difficult for white to attack. And really, I think that we should understand that Caruana made a very big mistake here. Probably not only on the board, like in terms of the move he did. I think that his main mistake was the fact that he did not take more time on his clock when he actually should have, and started calculating and trying to make the best move in this position, which is actually not characteristic of him. I think once again he was in the match under some pressure during the match. I think probably in any other circumstances you would pretty easily found the move queen h5 or knight c4 and probably played one of them. But this situation where he had to make, let's say, a very big decision in the World Championship match was probably slightly difficult for him. And once he played the move h3, his initiative, his advantage was gone, never to be returned. So in this position, the best he found was to play knight takes d6 followed by h4, which looks nice because white is trying his best to destroy black's pawn skeleton on the king side in order to try to get to the king. But the problem is that after black takes this pawn on h4, white takes on f4, now the queens get exchanged, and without the queens on the board, it's significantly more difficult to attack the weakened black king. And actually this game was drawn fairly soon from this position, so the final position of this game looked something like this, where both sides have the same amount of pawns in opposite color bishop endgame, with a very big drawing tendency. They didn't even continue to try and test each other's technique. So basically, Caruana lost his chance to put more pressure on Carlsen, and very likely to win this game, because he did not realize the critical point in the game, did not put enough effort to calculate and to assess the position correctly, and because of this lost his advantage. That's maybe the main story of this game. Now, I wanted also to quickly show you what happened on game number 10, basically 2 games after this one. I wanted also to apologize for not taking a look at too many games where they played where Carlsen had the white pieces, just because they were much more calm, not too much details on this game. Carlsen was playing very safe, not even trying too hard to win the games, but I think he made it very clear throughout the match that he's very happy to go for the rapids, and all of those draws throughout the match really suited him. So in this game, I'm actually going to jump. This is game number 10 of the match. I'm going to jump to move number 12, because we already seen this position on game number 8. So both of the players, as you can see, played very quickly until this point. Surprisingly, by the way, Caruana was the first to deviate, even though he got a nice position in the other game with the move bishop d2 here, but he wanted the first to surprise his opponent. He played here the move b4 pretty quickly, which is a logical move, because once again white's advantage is mainly on the queen side of the board, so activating his pawn majority there makes a lot of sense. Carlsen already here started to consume quite a lot of time, because I don't think he was expected to be surprised in such an early stage of the game. He played a6 already after 10 minutes of thinking, but we cannot blame him. He was the first to be surprised, so he took some time to make sure everything is okay. Knight to a3, this is the same maneuver we have seen in the other game. Carlsen took another 5 minutes to play the move a5. I think it's a good choice, because if now white plays the move b5, which I think is a very bad positional move, white loses all of his flexibility with his pawns, and black will now put a very strong blockade on the dark squares, and the white's pawns will be essentially stopped altogether. So that's why Caruana took on a5. He was still playing very quickly, because he was obviously still in his preparation. Knight c4, attacking the rook, rook to a8, bishop to e3, very natural move. Already you can see that Caruana has a 20 minutes advantage on the clock. Carlsen is playing very slowly, making sure that everything is okay, because he knows he's slightly out prepared here. He plays f5. Really the nature of the game is pretty similar to the previous game, maybe with a small difference that here actually black was the one to take the quicker initiative on the king side, and actually he was the one to try and attack the white king. Caruana played the move a5 also pretty quickly, probably still in his preparation. Black played f4 to attack the bishop, and the bishop was forced to go to b6. At this point the knight can capture the bishop, but I think Carlsen did not really want to allow this knight to get to b6 so easily, so he played queen to e8 fairly quickly. Also a logical move, because the queen wants to come and assist black's attack on the king side. Rook to a3. This is a nice defensive move. It took Caruana almost 15 minutes to play it, but the rook is going to be very useful in the defense of the white king. And I'm going to jump now a couple of moves forward. Queen g6, eyeballing the white king, bishop to c7. And now black played e4, activating his central majority. I think that something went slightly wrong with Caruana's preparation here. He either forgot it or just one of Carlsen's moves made him slightly confused, because I think at this point black is doing very well. His pawns are actually very mobile and scary. At this moment actually the move f3 is a very big threat. So white had to play king to h1. And once again, the topic of this video is critical moments. And I think that Carlsen took his time here because he understood that this is an important moment in the game. He knew that he has good attacking chances here, but he have to find a good way to destroy some of white's defensive potential. He understood that the rook on a3 is a very important defensive piece. In many variations, this rook covers many squares on the king side. So he thought for a long time, but managed to find this. I really like this move, pawn to b5. Very surprising move, because it would seem like black would be focusing his attention on the king side, but he suddenly plays this move on the queen side of the board, sacrificing a pawn. If white wants, he can just take on b6, but this is whole idea. Now he can take on a3, force the knight back, so now the knight is kind of decentralized. Also, white's very important defensive piece, the rook on a3, was exchanged. And now black's attack is getting a lot of fuel. He can play f3, for example. White is forced to take, pawn takes f3, knight e5 at tempo, something like bishop g2, queen h6. This position, white has two pawns up, but many of his pieces are very awkwardly placed on the queen side of the board. They cannot really assist the white king, and black has a huge attack coming. Just to name a few ideas, black has the move knight g4 at his disposal. He has this rook maneuver to h4 to attack the pawn on h2. He can try to maneuver his bishop to f4 to attack this pawn. This bishop on c8 can join the attack. Really a huge attack is coming. And Caruana on his side also understood that this position is very important and critical, took his time to think and found a very good move, knight to b6. 15 minutes about this move, but this was maybe the move that saved the game for him. Exchanging some pieces, first of all, if you know that you are going to get under attack, it's a very good idea to exchange some pieces. And now, thanks to the fact that the rooks stayed on a3, it was much more difficult for Carlsen to develop his attack further. The game was eventually drawn. So with this video, I'm going to conclude this video. I will also mention that my friends at the Remote Chess Academy released a very cool offer for the time period of the World Championship match, with their products about the previous world champions, about Carlsen, about Kasparov and Fischer. So you can check it out in the link below. And with this, I really want to wish you guys all the best. Hope you learned something new from these videos about the decision making of such strong players and how to assess critical moments in a chess game. So thank you guys very much. See you guys in the next time. Bye bye.